listen to full-length, commercial-free episodes of the Divorcing Religion podcast on Patreon. Please sign up at patreon.com/Janice Selby or click the link in the show notes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. And I am very pleased today to have a friend of mine joining us on the show, Dr. Clint Heacock.
Thank you, Janice.
Heacock, you're welcome. I want to tell them a little bit about you because I find your journey quite interesting. Dr. Heacock is an ex-evangelical pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years. He's now committed to helping people who have left cults or religion unpick the indoctrination, mind control, and conditioning and take back their lives. Clint also spoke at the conference on religious trauma earlier this year, and you folks might recognize him from his excellent podcast, MindShift. And that's how we actually met each other, was when you interviewed me when I had first developed the Divorcing Religion workshop. And we started talking more and more, and I was recommending guests for you. And you were a real encouragement to me as I was developing the conference on religious trauma. And then you even you stopped over in Canada and brought your sister, and we had a lovely visit together a couple of years back. It's just been a really great intersection, the way our paths have crossed.
It really has. I think you've been on my podcast more than any one person.
Yay!
So that you hold that singular honor, or that might be, I don't know if it's an honor or what.
It certainly is. And I still really get so much value listening to your podcast because the guests that you've had on there have really helped educate me as a Canadian about what America is like and what's going on in America, and the different guests like Kurt Anderson and different authors that you've had on there talking about the rise of Christian nationalism. That is stuff that everybody needs to know. That's affecting people in real time. And you've been out there with a megaphone letting people know. So I really appreciate you're doing a great service with the MindShift podcast.
Thank you very much. I think that's my kind of wiring to be a teacher. That's what I am, a teacher by sort of profession and by wiring. So what I do is I love reading books. I love researching for myself, and then I love to share that with other people. So when I read a good book that I think, oh, this person would make a fantastic guest, most of the time I find they are willing to talk about. I've only had one person who turned around and said, no, you don't have a big enough platform, basically, is what I won't name who it is. But,
wow.
Otherwise, I've had really, really good luck, I should say, finding guests from books and articles that I've read online and things. So if I can share that with the world and help amplify their message, it's a win-win, isn't it? As well as what you were saying about your work.
Yeah, it's good. We're both doing a service. And your background, your parents bought into the IBLP, Bill Gothard, all that stuff. When you were already, you had already had a childhood that was in regular school. Is that right? Or tell me again.
Yes, that's true. So I was raised in a very Christian fundamentalist home. Luckily, I look at it now, my parents didn't homeschool us because what you're referring to is the Bill Gothard, I call it a cult.
Yes.
It was called Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts when I was a kid in the 70s.
Right.
It's now changed to Institute in Basic Life Principles. Right. But yes, they do have a homeschooling arm called the ATI, Advanced Training Institute, which a lot of people I've talked to have gone through that as well. But they tried to raise us according to Bill Gothard's sort of child rearing and marriage principles. Right. So I view it as a cult. But yeah, I switched over to a Christian day school when I was in 5th grade. So I went to a public school up until 4th grade, and then we switched over. And then I was in Christian high school all the way through graduation, basically.
And then at what point did you start wondering? And even before that, did you balk? Was it like, I just finished speaking with Jerusha Laughlin, who was also a speaker at the conference on religious trauma. And her parents, she was homeschooled from the get-go. And she said every time her folks went away to a Gothard conference and they'd come back, she'd lose another privilege or another, that she'd lose TV, and then she'd lose being able to wear pants. She could only wear dresses, and then she couldn't listen to Christian music, all that kind of stuff. Was that a similar experience for you, or did you buy in right from the start?
Well, I was raised in it, and that's the difference. So I've done podcasts with my sister Valerie, whom you've met, as you say, a few years back before COVID. We went up to Vancouver from Seattle, where we're both from, had a fantastic pub lunch with a bunch of people. You guys came down from Kelowna. That was one of the highlights of my whole trip to Seattle, really. It was. But Valerie was raised in a really slightly different situation, because when she was a young girl, my parents weren't in the Gothard thing. They were Christians. But then at a certain point, when she was about 9 or 10, they started attending the conferences, changing their marriage, changing their child-rearing strategy. So she saw a very discrete before and after, and it wasn't for the better. It was a change, not for the better, in her view. From my point of view, I was raised in it. So I never had a choice. I thought this was normal. It's just normalized. And so you don't know any different. So I just believed it. I thought that's the way it was. And you didn't question anything growing up. That was kind of the way it was.
And so then you did the Christian thing, and you went to Bible college, and you got your Bible. And not only did you go to Bible college, you got your PhD in theology, right? Yeah.
Yes, I did.
That's a big deal. That speaks to a very high level of both indoctrination and commitment.
It is true. And I did a couple of master's degree along the way as well. So I was in education as a student for about 14 years straight. So I went straight through Bible college, I did an MA at seminary, took about a year off, and then went back and did a THM, which is kind of halfway between a Master of Arts and a PhD. And then a few years later, we moved over here to the UK, where I did my PhD in biblical studies and preaching. So I was a professional student.
Yeah.
But I was trying to figure it all out. Now I look back on it, I think a lot of my quest for studying Greek, studying Hebrew, studying theology was a way to figure my own faith out. I thought, if I could read Greek, if I can read Hebrew, I can really get to the heart of the Bible, and really figure out how to translate the text in the most accurate way, and blah, blah, blah. And I found out the deeper you dive into it, actually, the more sort of vagaries you come up with, because there's so many manuscripts and so many, it's just a whole mess there, but it's not as straightforward as I thought.
And at what point did you get married?
Okay, so I got married when I was 25. So I was living in Seattle, playing in Christian metal bands. This was before we went to Bible college. But I had this dream to go to Bible college and be some sort of either a pastor or a teacher. I knew I wanted to be, quote unquote, in ministry, as it were. So when I met my now ex-wife, but Lisa, I was playing in this Christian band. Her brother was the bass player in this Christian metal band. And even then, that was our way of being, missional. We were going to be rockers for God, So it was even the context of us getting married and meeting was all about, we're going to be missionary, we're going to be missional, So even if it was going and playing bars and clubs, secular clubs, we were going to rock for Jesus. We were kind of like, back in the days of Stryper and all those kind of big Christian bands.
Yellow and Black Attack.
We used to see them every year. I used to see the Resurrection Band, Daryl Vance, all those bands every year. We were huge into all that. We learned loads of their songs, played a lot of their songs, so I was in that kind of culture in the 80s, really.
But Lisa wasn't born into it. She came into it later. Is that right?
That's true,
religion.
So her brother and I met. I met her brother in high school. He was a year younger than me.
Right.
We played soccer or football, as they say in this country, and everywhere else in the world. I think everywhere else out of North America. But we played soccer together. He was the goalkeeper. I played soccer with him, and so then we developed a love for music and got into bands together. That's where I met Lisa.
Oh wow!
But he got saved at our Christian high school where we attended. And then he kind of dragged his whole family into it, I should say. Now, looking back on it, he's still very much into it. He's a pastor in the Seattle area, very much into it. And she and I have since deconstructed quite a bit, which was fortunate in the sense that even though our marriage is over, it wasn't for that particular reason.
Right.
A lot of people, one partner will deconstruct, and we've talked about this before, where one will stay, double down in the faith.
Yeah.
And at least we didn't have that problem.
Right.
We had other issues, but that wasn't one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you were able to be a support to each other as you were picking apart all that religious training and conditioning. So you
Very much so.
went all through, through the first part of your schooling. And then for the last leg related to your PhD, you guys moved to Wales.
Well, we moved to Chester, which is in the northwest of England.
Okay.
It's up near Liverpool. I went to the University of Chester, but then we slowly started migrating further and further out to North Wales, which is where I'm at now. I've been in this place for about 6 or 7 years. So we're way out in the country. Absolutely love it. It's a long drive, but it's a 500-year-old house. It's incredible. I mean,
my goodness.
People that come and stay here. I know. There's a place for you here, Janice, anytime. Nice. Free lodging.
And you had your daughters along the way.
Yes.
And so does everybody live in Wales now?
No. So when we first moved here, we all moved in Chester, which is right in that northwest area.
Yeah.
Now my girls, one of them lives in Leicester. The other one lives up in Leeds, which is up in the northeast, I guess you could say, up above Manchester. And the other one's down near Birmingham. So, and then my ex-wife has since moved down to Leicester. So when we split up, it was a couple of years ago, she's moved down. So she's closer to my youngest daughter now.
Yeah. And so when did and how did your deconversion all come about? Like, at what point were you starting to question things?
Well, this is something I learned from a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Marlene Winnell, who, I think she was on my podcast basically off of your recommendation. Yes. So that was really good. Unfortunately, she's kind of semi-retired now, so she doesn't really do a whole lot. But anyway, when I went through her book, Leaving the Fold, which I highly recommend for people who come out of controlling high demand fundamentalist religious groups, she said something that just absolutely rocked my world. She said, every time when you were in that religion that you had a question or a doubt, what that actually is, it's your authentic self sort of asserting itself. So every time I did have lots of questions about the Bible and about God and theology and the belief system that I was a part of, that was actually, as I see it now, my authentic self. But it was covered with a veneer of the religious self, which I had formed to fit into the church. And that's all I really ever knew growing up in it. So I see it now. I had lots and lots of doubts, but there was always an answer, in air quotes, apologetics and things like that. So, you have a question about the resurrection or the Bible, the inerrancy of Scripture, and it could be anything. Someone's got an answer for it, and I would be, satisfied for the time being. So I really see it as a long, long process of questioning things over the course of probably my whole life. But it wasn't until I was a pastor of a church down in Portland, I started reading a lot of progressive Christian authors like Rob Bell, Brian McLaren, Donald Miller, that I see now. That was a big step in my deconstruction because I started jettisoning a lot of my fundamentalist beliefs. And that was a very necessary step in that journey. I didn't fully deconvert at that time, but I needed to go through that stage to slowly walk myself out of the fundamentalism.
Oh boy, I remember when Rob Bell and Brian, what's his name, when their work started coming out, and we were on the very conservative Bible college campus at that time, and we were sounding the alarm about, oh no, young people, don't be reading these books. They're not gonna lead anywhere good. And now I'm like, no, brother.
I know. I remember that book, Love Wins, that Rob Bell came out with years ago.
Right.
It was kind of like a universalist argument that sort of everyone goes to heaven and in the end, and love wins. That book caused a firestorm in the evangelical fundamentalists. Sure, and I actually started reading the book review. I wrote an article about the book reviews of Love Wins, which is really interesting to see the reactions. There was one guy from the Southern Baptist Convention that wrote a 10-page book review, refuting it, of course. Yeah. I've never seen a 10-page book review, but he wrote a 10-page to refute every possible heresy in the book Love Wins. So I thought it's got to say something about the reactionary stance that these fundamentalists are taking to the book.
Yeah, methinks he doth protest too much. We're coming out with a 10-page book review.
Yeah.
And so you started questioning and not finding adequate answers to the questions that you had. And at that time, were you still pastoring?
Yes. And that got me into, as you can imagine, a lot of trouble. Toward the end of my pastoral tenure, I was there at the church in Portland I think I was there 12 years. I was an elder, then I became a pastor, then I became the head pastor. And then I was introducing a lot of these concepts in my sermons in different ways in the context of the church, which of course led immediately to conflict. I can remember one time I was teaching a class on the book of Genesis, and I brought up a book that from a professor that I had actually. And I mean, the class just erupted into an argument. I've never seen anything like it. The minute I introduced some of the concepts from this book, which was kind of a progressive idea, look at the first couple chapters of Genesis.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a huge firestorm on our hands. And we were in the middle of an argument about, you're denying the faith, you're denying creationism and blah, blah, blah. So that shows you, again, the reactionary stance. As soon as you start questioning things, they can get really, really upset.
Wow. The torches and the pitchforks start to come out. Yeah, really, that's just so uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable for everybody in the situation. And
it really caught me off guard because I was a sort of a new to teaching adults at that time. I was just an elder at the church, and I was bringing all this information thinking they were going to be excited as I was to learn a new take on the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh no.
Boy, did you get that wrong.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And it went all the way to the elder team at the top of the church. I mean, it caused letters were written and I was a heretic and blah, 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 So that's what I mean. And that was when I was still a pretty staunch evangelical. I was just trying to introduce a couple of new ideas.
Right.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Wow.
Don't you dare.
So you moved from quite fundamentalist to into a more progressive stance or view of the Bible and its interpretation. And then, I mean, eventually at some point, you found yourself on the other side completely, having divorced religion.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think Dave Warnock, my good friend, you probably spoke with him as well, but he said it was like the death of 1,000 cuts. It wasn't one cataclysmic event that I could point to and say that did it.
Yeah.
It was years and years of questioning things, not getting answers, then seeing the reactions, like my story of introducing this stuff in a Bible class. And then I've talked about this before. I used to teach at a Bible college up in Leeds, and the stuff I was introducing again caused a lot of problems with the students, and they would go to the head of the college and complain about me, that I was basically not a Christian, and I couldn't be a Christian because I was getting them to question the Bible. And those kind of experiences, you stand back and think, okay, why are they so threatened when these are actual academic ideas. These are not, I'm just not making this stuff up.
Right. Yeah.
These have been observed by theologians and biblical scholars and, academics, and I'm trying to expose them to different points of view, because that's what critical thinking is all about. You have to weigh up different arguments, look at the strengths and the weaknesses of each one, assess them as objectively as you can, and all the rest of it. No, it was an emotional reaction, and I was a heretic. I was, not a Christian and everything else.
And I do find fundamentalism, in whatever sphere we find it, does tend to be more emotional. It's much more about emotion and how we feel when we see others moving away from what we believe to be the truth, rather than so it's every time curiosity has to be stamped out with obedience. That's what is prized. That's what's the most important. Train up your children in the way they should go, so when they're old, they won't depart from it, rather than actually welcoming curiosity and saying, well, let's see what other people have had to say about this topic. Even people who aren't Christians, other people who are intelligent people who have letters behind their name. How do they view it? But that is just far too threatening when our identity is enmeshed with our ideology. We just can't even go there. So
yeah, there's something about that, because it was funny, because last Saturday, my girlfriend and I went out to where she lives, kind of a local town. They've got like an artisan market one Saturday a month. So, there's booths and everything set up in the middle of the town, really cool area. So we were sitting there, and we came out of a store in the morning, and there was a group of Christians that were evangelizing on the street. They had loudspeakers and they were passing out tracts and everything. And she was raised without any religious background pretty much whatsoever.
Isn't that refreshing?
It really is. Yeah. Cause I have to interpret to her what's going on,
Yeah.
So I said, look, there's some Christians. Do you want a tract? She was like, oh, no way. But then later they were packing up. So they left. Well, later we went and sat down and had lunch at this kind of pub. And I said, look, right across the way is a group of these, quote, truthers who are like anti-vax and conspiracy theories, like flat earthers. And I said, to me, the truth table that's passing out tracts about COVID and it's all a hoax and pandemic, that makes someone to get to the point where they're actually willing to set up a table in a town center and proclaim their truth, in air quotes, to the public. That's that fundamentalism I think you were referring to, where not only am I right, it's not enough to believe that I'm right. I've got to prove that everyone else is wrong. And I've got to show you the error of your ways too. And I need to go out in the public square if necessary and do that. So you see that drive. And I thought, my God, I remember doing that kind of stuff, preaching on the streets, going to Africa and preaching in the slums in Nairobi, because we were convinced that we needed to save the world.
Yes. And it is. And so it helps me at least retain a little bit of compassion, or at least keep my irritation from overwhelming me when dealing with conspiracy theorists who are exactly as indoctrinated and deceived and thinking that it's the truth. And they, of course, think we are deceived. And that's the exact same dynamic as between the believer and the non-believer when we're talking about religion. And it seems like QAnon it presents like another religion, like a new religion. So we're living in such a polarized time. And I think that's one of the saddest things when I have so many clients coming to me saying, how can I preserve my relationship with my parents or with my spouse now that I don't believe? So now they are no longer a Christian, but their parents or their spouse are. And not only that, it's often that their parents and the church have embraced these conspiracies. And so the things that they seem to have in common, the talking points that they used to have, they don't exist anymore, because you're always worried it's going to set the other person off. And people wonder, well, how can they maintain that relationship? And in fact, you and I, as the years have gone on and we've left religion farther and farther behind, you and I both ended up ending our marriages or having our marriages end. And that when we marry in the church, and for very Christian reasons, and then we raise our kids also to think that way. And then our kids kind of watch us deconstruct, and they have to figure out for themselves what they believe. And then they watch that our marriage also come to an end. That can be a really hard time for everybody. It seems from the outside like you and Lisa have done pretty well. You speak kindly of each other. You speak warmly of each other, and you've just been able to go on living your lives. The children still remain your connection to each other, your grown daughters. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we don't see each other now since she moved. It was about 2.5 hours away. But we still have a WhatsApp family group chat, which my girlfriend thinks is so strange.
Oh, we have a family chat too, and I can't imagine not having it.
And I said, we were actually sitting at a pub a few months ago, and a message came up on the WhatsApp chat, and I was chatting away, and she came and sat down. She's like, "What the hell are you doing?" Because for her, she divorced her husband, and it was not a good marriage. It was very dysfunctional. So in her view, they do share a son. So they do have to kind of touch base once in a while when it concerns issues with their son. But in my case, I said, it's not like that. Right. We are a family. Yes, we're not technically married, but we'll never change the fact that we still have 2 daughters together.
And 20 years of history, or however
30
long
years,
you guys, 30 years.
Over 30 years we were married. So you can't just throw that all the way. Well, you could, I suppose, but
you can't erase it.
Yeah, we wanted to model to our daughters too that it can be done, and be amicable toward each other. Beautiful. And we still stay in touch. She Lisa messaged me the other day on WhatsApp and asked me about my podcast mic, because she wants a better mic, so, and I was just giving her some tips and advice, the things that I've learned over the years and stuff. And, just simple things like that. But you think, I'm glad that she's thinking that she could still ask me a simple question that we would have done when we were still married.
Absolutely. Or if she needs a hand with something and it's your area of expertise with your woodworking, of course you'll be happy to share with her. And I think that's the difference between when Christians divorce, it is so much viewed as a shameful failure. And when the rest of us divorce, it's a transition. It's not a failure. It means, okay, our relationship is about to change and it'll look different going forward. We're no longer lovers and connected by, the confines of marriage, but there's no reason we can't still be friends. It just looks different. And that's also because there wasn't abuse going on in our relationships. There are some relationships, some marriages, they have got to end for the safety and well-being of the partner and the children. I'm really glad that you guys have been able to just maintain a friendliness towards one another. I think it is a beautiful example to our children as well.
It's true.
That it's possible.
Well, and like you said, when you take the religious component out of it, you can look at it exactly as you just described it. The marriage had basically irretrievably broken down for a number of reasons. Nobody had an affair. There wasn't any kind of abuse. We just drifted apart over the years, and we were both not happy in the situation. We finally sat down across from each other in the living room a few years ago. We basically said, "Are you happy? No. Are you happy? No." Okay. I've established that baseline. What does that mean now? Life is too short to live in an unhappy relationship. Yes. It really is.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, if that's the case, what does that mean? We probably should look at separating and see. And we did that as a trial for about 6 months. And we said, we'll probably know within a few months if that's the right decision. And we did. Within a few months, I turned around and said to her, "Are you happy being single, living down there?" Because she only lived about 45 minutes from me for the first year. And we actually shared a dog. So every weekend we would meet in town.
That's right.
It was really crazy. It was like, my girlfriend was like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" But I suppose it was a way to kind of touch base once a week and just, even if it was to meet in a parking lot and give the dog to the other person. But we said, "Look, are you happy or single and being on your own?" And we're like, "Yeah, definitely. This was the right thing." Okay, let's just go ahead and put the paperwork together and make it formal then. And it wasn't any hard feelings. But there's no blame assigned. Like in a biblical marriage, you have to say, okay, do you have biblical grounds for being married? And in many cases, some churches will not allow it at all. They'll tell the abused woman to stay in the relationship. People like John Piper and others, she has to endure the abuse for a season and then get help from the church. And, it's just crazy.
And I think it also relates to what you alluded to. You said something to the effect that life is too short to stay, miserable or in a situation, marriage situation where you're not happy. But of course, religious people, they don't see that this is the only life. They see this is the human part of life. But then we go on in the afterlife and, we'll have somehow everything will be fine there. Yeah. So I feel like when I divorced religion, I embraced reality. And for me, that meant things that can be verified. Not just things based on somebody thinks this or it has a nice feeling. When I left Christianity, I pitched my tent in the New Age camp and I was very happy there for a number of years. It felt freeing for me because I could explore these things that have been off limits before, psychics and astrology and afterlife, kind of stuff. And then it got to a point where people were trying to tell me that they could channel these beings from other dimensions. Okay. I'm like, oh my God, this again. That's what it
Did
felt
this
like.
Already,
too familiar. Been there,
like
done
prayer.
that. Yeah, exactly.
Speaking and then in tongues.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just felt
basically
it was too much.
In another name.
By another name.
It really is. It really is.
People didn't like it when I said, I don't actually think you're channeling anything. I don't buy it. Yeah. I think and they feel like it's very real. Like when I would speak in tongues, it felt very real to me. I felt super close to the God that I thought existed at that time. I thought it was a very big deal. And so, of course, it's offensive to people when I would say to them, I don't think you're channeling anything. No, you're really not. And they don't want to hear that, because then they don't feel special. And they want to feel like they have a connection to this wonderful, magnificent, ethereal, whatever it is. And at that point, that's when I really started going, you know what? I don't actually think I need any of this. I don't have to maintain some kind of belief in spirituality. I really don't. I'm living for today and for this life that I have. I hope I have several more years, but if not, I'm just going to keep putting all my effort into the relationships around me, not kind of banking things for heavenly hereafter stuff.
Yeah, it's so true. Your perspective changes, and it's interesting to step back a year or two or three later and look back on that journey. How far you changed, because going out with my girlfriend now, we've been going out just over 10 months, so almost a year now. And I wasn't really looking for anything. It just sort of happened, and one of them organic things. I think probably maybe what happened to you, I don't know, but we could probably talk about that somewhere else. But you find yourself in this relationship and sort of going through all this stuff, and I'll go stay the night at her house, she'll come stay here. So obviously there's a sexual component, which in the context of religion, that's evil and wrong because we're not married. And having to process all that is so refreshing to say, okay, I don't feel the guilt and the shame that I should be feeling, because this is wrong and evil and against God's plan, and we're not married and we're having an adulterous relationship. Oh my God, And yet I don't feel any of that. And it's so refreshing to go, okay, why don't I feel that? Because like you said, I've jettisoned all of that purity culture nonsense that I was raised in. This would have been horribly wrong, 30 years ago.
Yes. And you have a family member also who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And so did that sort of unfold while you were still in the church or after you'd left?
Yes. Well, my daughter she came out as gay probably 10 or 12 years ago. And of course we knew, it wasn't a surprise to anybody, but she had to do it on her own terms, which I think is a very common thing. Yeah. We suspected / knew, I knew years and years before.
Had you and Lisa talked about it?
Yeah, we kind of skirted around the issue. I wonder why she never seems to have a boyfriend, and she seems to hang around with other sort of LGBTQ people at her high school. These seem to be her circle of friends, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're gay, obviously. Right. But you think, okay, what? Maybe there's something there. But when she finally came out, she was absolutely petrified that we were going to disown her and everything else, and more concerned about some of our in-laws that were kind of staunch evangelicals. Right. But and one of my sisters did, in fact, disown her. A fundamentalist, my oldest sister, basically just turned around and said, well, you're going to hell and you've made a sinful choice, and started trotting out all these Bible verses. And, goodness. So you could see the reactions again.
And were you out of the church by that time, or in a more progressive arm of the
definitely.
church?
We were questioning a lot of things. I was definitely in that progressive sort of area, because we were already moving over here. We'd already lived over here, I should say. So when she came out, so we were questioning things. The church we were a part of, we were kind of on the way out anyway, So it was that was an interesting journey for sure, because she had to, like I said, she had to do it on her own terms. And once she came out, we're like, well, of course we knew, this is not a secret, she was so relieved, why didn't you tell me that you knew? And I'm like, well, we couldn't. We obviously had to wait for you to feel like you were ready to make it a public thing.
Mm-hmm. And had your sister left fundamentalism? Your sister Val?
My sister Valerie has, yes, definitely. We're both on a very similar journey. So, in fact, I just talked to her last night. She's coming over here next July.
Nice.
So I haven't seen her since before COVID and everything. So really looking forward to catching up in person. We chat on Facebook Messenger and things like that. But yeah, she's on a real similar journey. But some of my other sisters, not so much, especially one of my other sisters who's still very much into the fundamentalist thing. And going back to what you said, I mean, that sister that disowned my daughter, she was in a loveless sham of a marriage to a Christian man, and he finally passed away, even though she was absolutely miserable in the marriage, but she couldn't get a divorce because there were no quote-unquote biblical grounds for divorcing him, even though she was absolutely miserable and unhappy. And he finally passed away, at which point then she was, of course, free to remarry in the eyes of the church. You think, God, I mean, you wasted 30-some years of your life being miserable and unhappy. Why? Because the Bible says you can't divorce this person.
Yeah. Contrary to what Christians believe, there is actually no prize for being a martyr. This is, you just muted yourself.
Yes, I know. I was moving in my chair and I didn't want it to squeak.
Thank you. No prize for being a martyr. This is the life that we have. So we better make the most of it. And that will look different for different people. What was the hardest for you about divorcing religion?
Well, I think a lot of people will say this, and I think it's true for me too. It was sort of losing that fear of hell. That's probably one of the biggest things to give up at the very end. I could question whether or not there's a God, and if the God of the Bible is the true God and everything else. I went down that road, but giving up the fear of hell and the rapture, if all that's true, we're in a lot of trouble, Janice.
Right.
You and I are definitely going to hell, man.
We're in the bad books.
Yeah, we're in the bad books. We're not in the book of life, and I grew up with the fear of the rapture and everything else, so it's so hard to jettison that. And you think, okay, that's one of the final pieces that a lot of ex-evangelicals struggle to give up, I think, and I did too.
How did you make your way out of it? What helped you to be able to release that fear?
Well, honestly, I mean, I read that book, Love Wins by Rob Bell, and a lot of it is not so much making a case for the fact that he thinks everyone's going to end up in heaven. It's a lot of it is a biblical argument for actually the Bible doesn't really teach the view of hell that fundamentalism presents, this fiery eternal torment and everything else, eternal conscious torment in the flames of hell forever and ever and ever, and there's no escape and everything else. And he goes through and basically shows that actually that's an unbiblical view, if you will. And that was the first kind of step in going, actually, yeah, what do I think? The Bible doesn't even present that view. And then I was questioning the Bible. So if you're questioning the Bible itself, you go, well, on what basis am I, living out this phobia? It's an implanted phobia. It's something that cults do. They implant phobias in their adherents to scare them and keep them in line. And this, I think a lot of it is what this is. This is like the ultimate trump card. And if you take that away, you remove that trump card, then the whole thing starts to fall down, doesn't it?
Yep, that's very true. Folks might be interested to know if you retained a relationship with your parents after you rejected religion, or if you let it go by the wayside.
The relationship with my parents? Well, I did, but there were some other mitigating circumstances that came up whereby around about the time, maybe 4 or 5 years after we moved to the UK, it came out that my father had basically molested my 2 oldest sisters when they were young girls. And it all kind of came out of the blue toward the end of his life.
Wow.
So unfortunately, I should say I had to cut off my relationship with my mother after my father died because she ended up defending him and accusing us of making it all up, and the typical sort of attack and blame the victim, sort of the Darvo kind of approach to it all. And off the back of that, I finally said to her, look, I can't maintain a relationship with you because you're too toxic of a person. And so I have not spoken to my mom in probably 7 or 8 years. And it's not necessarily to do with religion. It has more to do with how the situation with my dad went down in the end. And he's since passed away. Now they were both staunch evangelicals. And I had one last conversation with him before he died. And I said, look, you believe you're a Christian, you're going to go to heaven someday and you're going to stand before God. And he's going to say, look, you had a chance while you were alive to make all this right. You need to confess what you've done and tell the truth to your victims. And he didn't do it. He wouldn't do it. He took all of his secrets to the grave with him. Yeah. So in a way, religion did play a factor in it, even though he turned his back basically on everything that he supposedly stood for all of his life. I mean, he was an elder in the church. He was a worship leader. He played the piano. He was very involved in the church all of his adult life, but he probably molested, kids throughout the whole time, I would imagine.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a hard, and I think it is shockingly common.
Yeah.
But people don't talk about it. This goes on in families, but because we have the idealized Brady Bunch view in our head, Leave It to Beaver idea of what family is supposed to look like, we keep it hushed and we don't let people talk about it and come forward with these things. So I really commend you for the stand that you did take and for believing and supporting your sisters. That's really something. And I've had a similar situation in my own life, in my own family, and the support of my siblings has also been just really important and really helpful.
Yeah. And I think it shows, like I was talking about the religious piece of it, it shows the toxicity of religion and how it's all pervasive in every aspect of our life. Because I remember talking to my dad when this all first started coming out. He originally started talking about, he said, well, the truth is I'm gay. That's what this is all about. I'm gay. And I've been, living in the closet my whole life. And he said, well, what I'm going to do is, I know it's wrong. It's against the Bible. I'm going to go get rebaptized. I'm going to read my Bible every day. I'm going to go talk to the pastor. I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And I said, Dad, if you're gay, that's not going to somehow cure you, in air quotes, make you straight. So even then, but it was all lies anyway. But that's the mentality that going and getting rebaptized and reading your Bible every day and all that is somehow going to cure you, in air quotes, whatever your addiction or problem is. So the whole thing was still shot through with religious concepts.
What's the best thing to you about having divorced religion?
Oh, the best thing I think is living my life with that complete autonomy, knowing that I take responsibility for my actions, my choices, my decisions. Yeah, I take the consequences for it too, but I have that freedom. I was talking to the guys from I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast the other day from Australia, and they said this really hit home, this idea that I'm a practical atheist. I don't read my Bible. I don't pray. I don't seek God. I don't call the pastor when I make a major life decision. Recently, I turned my notice in at work, and I'm quitting my job, and I'm trying to start a new job. I didn't pray about that. I didn't consult the Bible. I didn't bring the pastor and ask for his advice. I talked about it with my girlfriend. We just talked through different scenarios. We made the best sort of informed decision, and I turned my notice in, and I've been, in the process of transitioning out, and it's just, there's stresses, of course, associated with that, but I'm okay to accept the reality, whatever that means, and that would be a massive difference. Because I remember as an evangelical, you would pray and fast and read the Bible and talk to the pastor and talk to wise Christians and everything else to get, and hopefully you'll find God's will. What's God's will in all this? And you never seem to know what it was,
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, I just made a decision to quit my job and try to get another job, period. Just that's the way it works. That's what I did.
That's life. Exactly.
Yeah. And it may work better and it may not, but I'll just get another job. If this one doesn't work out,
that's right.
I'll do something different.
Yes. There's a resilience that hopefully comes with age and maturity, but that requires us to take steps on our own along the way. And sometimes the things don't work out, and sometimes they work out great. And with each of those, we can be gaining confidence in our own ability to see and discern things and figure out what to do. We don't need a pastor or a priest or someone telling us what to do. We don't need to base anything on the Bible, since it's, mythology anyway. And we need to see religions for what they are, which is mythology, which is people from long ago trying to come up with answers and guidelines for living their lives. And so that's what they did. But this is what I'm doing, and it's completely different from that. And I feel great about it. What I do hear from people struggling with is, so they no longer believe, and they are, lots of them become atheists. But then who do they pray to? That's the wonder. They say, oh, my grown adult child is having this health problem. And it used to be, I would give all my concerns to God before going to bed at night, and I could fall asleep, and I would just leave it in God's hands. Yes. Psychologically, something is going on there. And then now they're like, where do I put this? What do I do with this? And so I've said, well, you do reach out to a secular therapist. That's one way to handle things. And also speaking openly and candidly to your grown child. You can tell them, I love you so much, and I see this going on, and I'm concerned. And I want to know, is there anything I can do? How can I support you? But taking out that middleman is really, really hard for a lot of people.
It really is. And you want to help them in so many ways, but actually praying, as we probably know from our shared experiences, I spent hours and days and months and years in fervent prayer.
Yes.
For what? I've had relatives and friends die that I prayed for. I've never seen a miraculous healing. I spent hours and hours and hours in prayer for different outcomes and things, and it never happened. And there's always an explanation.
Yeah.
God, my phrase is, God always gets off the hook. There's always a way that, it's never God's fault. He's never to blame. The reason that person died, even though we prayed for him or her, was because, he was trying to teach us a lesson about faith or trust in him, or he wanted that person to go to heaven. He wanted another angel in his choir. There's always some platitude.
Yeah.
And God is never to blame for it if he doesn't come through. And so I think,
God's ways are higher than our ways.
Yeah, God's ways are mysterious. We'll know someday when we get to heaven what the answer was. Why didn't you answer that prayer? Why didn't you heal her of the cancer that tore her apart, and suffered horribly, and on it goes. And you think, okay, well, what good did that prayer actually do? It's just a magical thinking. That's what it is. That's actually what it is. It's magical thinking. It's projection, and that kind of thing.
Makes the prayer feel better. Makes the one who's praying feel better. I was going
to say, it's like every time there's a mass shooting in America, what's the thoughts and prayers? That hasn't stopped a single mass shooting yet that I can tell. And there's a lot of people praying that the next one won't happen, and they do it after every one that happens. So why isn't God stopping those mass shootings in America?
Yeah. It is troubling right now seeing how divisive things are. And it's not just in America, it's around the world. Every nation is having to come to terms with magical thinking on some level. So in Canada, it's not as much the religious fervor now as it seems to be the people who are embracing conspiracy theories. And they are very pushy about it, and it makes the tensions greater in an already tense situation, because the pandemic made everyone pretty tense. So
it's true.
There's a lot going on these days. So then what gives you hope in an age where it looks like there's so many things going crazy? What's giving you hope, or thinking positively about the future and potential?
Yeah, thinking positive. That's a good point, because I was going to say, when we were talking about, me switching jobs and things like that. What gives me sort of positivity now is such irony that I've been at this job for 3.5 years, and in that time, I've gotten experience teaching. I teach construction skills. That's what I do. I used to be a Bible college teacher. So I spent years and decades in, higher education, getting all these degrees. All those degrees didn't serve me anything. They didn't do anything for me to get me a better job. Now, in the last 3.5 years, I've earned 3 teaching qualifications, and I've gotten more experience. So when I went into this interview at this new job, they were like falling all over themselves to offer me this new job. And they said, because you've got these qualifications, you've got this experience. And I came out of the interview and I called my girlfriend and I said, that really blew my mind to see that how I've progressed professionally in the last 3.5 years. And that's made me a more valuable potential employee, worth more money and, everything else. And I thought, my God, all those Bible college degrees and all that stuff didn't do me any good at all. So that gives me hope that, the career path that I've taken is a positive one, has nothing to do with the Bible or theology or God. It's just professional development. It's just career development. And it makes me feel more secure in myself that I did it. I'm the one who put in all the work. I did all the coursework. I did all those classes. I got those qualifications. I earned them by my hard work and effort, so I didn't pray. I didn't, all those kind of things. I didn't ask God for, and it just happened because I was in that context, so I take responsibility for it. Yeah, I put in all the hard work, but I'm now seeing the benefit of all that effort in a more professional sense, having that master's degree and PhD. I mean, people say, you've got a PhD. What the hell, man? What are you doing? But it gives me a chance to tell that story,
Exactly. And so if I hope we're allowed to say it looks like you'll be working in the prison system.
That's true.
And sharing the knowledge that you have, teaching construction skills in there. I'm really curious, and I'm sure you are too, what that's going to be like, that environment. And so many folks who end up in prison, they become like a captive audience for preachers or whatever religion is allowed to go in and promote their stuff. And ideology. These people are so desperate that they gravitate towards it, and you're going in there like, oof, none of that is going to touch me because that's not what I'm about. And inmates will ask you about your life experience. So I think that's going to be really interesting.
It is interesting, and I've shared this story many times before. What ended up kind of getting me the job was my current job. I teach military veterans, so I teach skills to military vets who are coming out of the Army and the Navy and Royal Air Force and all that. And a lot of them have severe PTSD. So when they asked me, what makes you a good fit for this job at the prison? I said, well, I mean, I'm not teaching prisoners, but they're talking about people who have mental health and well-being issues. So I see that very much as a pastoral role. In fact, I've just had a new cohort start a few weeks ago as we're doing this recording. And I've got a couple of guys in there that have kind of confided in me that they've struggled with PTSD and things. So I've been able to support them, again, in a non-religious sense.
Yes.
I give them the help that they need. I'm connecting them with the support system that they need. And one guy said to me the other day, he said, I'm ashamed to have to admit that I have this problem. And I said, look, this happened to you because you were serving in a combat zone. You saw things, horrific, terrible things. You were forced to do terrible things. So it's not your fault. And it's not a sign of weakness that you have these issues. So what we need to do now is get you the help that you need. So he came up to me the other day and he said, just thank you so much for just helping me out and supporting me. And it's only been a couple of weeks into the course, and I thought, okay, that's what it's all about. And again, I didn't say, well, God's going to save you, brother.
Right.
Let's see what the Bible has to say about your PTSD.
You approached him compassionately as a humanist, de-shamifying the thing he's saying he feels shame about, and also showing that you believe in his ability to do what needs to be done. And that's what it's like in the prison. You can be going in there. You might be the first person that these inmates interact with who believes in them in their ability to learn the skills that you're teaching them and then apply them practically and potentially make a life for themselves outside of the prison that they're in.
It really is amazing because a couple of cohorts ago, I teach 6 cohorts a year. I had a guy that went through the cohort about 2.5, 3 years ago before COVID. This is the guy that came out of Afghanistan. Then he went back as basically like a mercenary for the American government. He has severe combat PTSD. And he said he came back and spoke to the current cohort. And he said, this course literally changed my life. He said and I was absolutely blown away when I heard him say that. He said, I came out of the military. I came out of that being a mercenary, and I was struggling. He put guys in the hospital in bar fights and things like that because he would just rage and flip out. And he's a massive guy, huge guy, so he could do a lot of damage. And he said, this course was the first thing I did out of therapy that was a positive thing in my life. And now he's got a job. He does like steel erecting, for mezzanine floors and warehouse pallet racking. He's running 8 crews around the country. He's making good money.
Wow.
He's just doing so well. And I just sat there and thought, okay, I had a small part to play in his sort of transformation. And again, it's totally a secular thing. I didn't, pray with him or give him a Bible tract or anything like that,
Wow, that is really exciting. I think that's just fantastic. I'm glad that he shared that and you got to hear that.
Oh, man.
That's a really positive way for you to be ending your job in the college that you've been in, to know that you have impacted people positively and made a difference in their lives.
It really is. And that's probably the one thing I'm going to miss the most is, that's why I quit the job for a number of reasons, but that's what kept me there as long as it did, because like my girlfriend said, teaching that course ticks pretty much every box for you. Yeah. You get to teach, you get to have a laugh, you put your music on in the workshop, we have a fun time. I create a really fun, healthy, environment in there. Yeah. But they are learning something, and there's that sort of pastoral side, but it's with that non-religious piece, and you get that consistent feedback that actually this is a really positive thing. And a lot of people with PTSD come out and say it is life-changing. I had one woman, she was an Army surgeon who served in Afghanistan and operated on severely wounded soldiers and civilians, and has severe PTSD. From what she saw and had to go through as a surgeon. And she said, again, this course was the first thing I did that was something where I could work with my hands. And while I'm, plastering a wall or sawing a piece of wood or whatever it was, I wasn't thinking about my PTSD. And it was the first time where I could sort of disassociate and then at the end of the day go, I made that, I built that with my own 2 hands. And it was a positive thing, so she, it was just an inspirational thing. So yeah, it is making a difference.
And if there is any group that we can be fairly sure will struggle with PTSD, it's people who are incarcerated, because it is a very, very difficult communal living situation to be in. So I think you're going to have the opportunity to do a lot of good in there as a non-pastor. Yeah,
I'm not bringing my Bible in there.
That's right.
That's for sure.
Well, this has been really interesting. It's always such a joy to connect with you. Thanks for coming on the Divorcing Religion podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And I was going to say before we go, we should think about doing a reciprocal part 1, part 2 again. So maybe we could do a part 2 on my podcast, and then people could have to listen to that other half. So we need to maybe put our heads together on that too. We can promote your show as well.
I love it. That's a great idea. And I will just remind viewers and listeners to subscribe to the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel so you never miss an episode of the Divorcing Religion podcast. And of course, to pick up your tickets for Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture. That conference is coming up in less than a month. And if you feel so moved, I welcome you to support me on Patreon. And the links for all those are in the show notes. And we'll also have a link to Clint and anything he wants to share. So whether about, people will want to know how to find you and also how to find your excellent podcast. So you can give me all that information and we'll keep it in the show notes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Janice. Again, I always love meeting with you. I wish we could meet in person. You've got a place to stay.
Right
Anytime,
on.
come to visit me in North Wales. Free lodging. You can't beat it.
All right. I'm just about on my way.
Okay,
Thanks again,
buy your
Clint.
tickets now.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Janice. Bye.